I remember when all this I remember thing had just started. Seriously, it seems to have really taken off, and I couldn't be happier. But watching all these other videos is reminding me about how much about Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 I didn't cover. In all honesty, I could probably talk for hours about it, but in retrospect, my video seems kind of negative in comparison to some of the others. Sounds like I'm saying that the people were the only thing that was ever good about Final Fantasy XIV, and that's not true. If the people were all there was to Final Fantasy XIV, it would have died. That's all there was to it. The people were enough to keep me involved in the game as long as there was hope of things getting better, but without that hope, it would have been pointless. And given how gamers tend to feel about game companies and the lukewarm reception to the last few Final Fantasy titles, salvaging this game was beyond the capabilities of any game exec or committee. There was literally nothing in the game building playbook to cover something like this. We needed a crazy person. We got him. I've never actually paid attention to the producer of a game before. I honestly couldn't tell you the name of the producer of Final Fantasy XI or World of Warcraft or the Old Republic, but not only do I know who Yoshi P is, I could recognize him in the crowd instantly. And given the chance, I would buy the man a beer or a sake or whatever he drinks, just to get the chance to hear his side of the story. Yes, Naoki Yoshida is not your average crazy person. He is a heroic crazy person, like straight out of an anime. He's like Kotaro Taiga from Gaogaigar doing something completely bananas and making it awesome. And he surrounded himself with more heroic crazy people. And they have accomplished what, by all rights, should have been impossible. Final Fantasy XIV was not just taken offline and rebuilt, to be relaunched and new and improved. That wasn't good enough. No, Yoshi P and his team realized they had a rare and unique asset in their task. The players. They had the people who would be playing the game right there. And so rather than tell them to come back later, they brought them along. We were skeptical at first, of course. We had every right to be. The changes were minor to start. They made the mobs bigger for easier targeting. Fine. But they had the NPCs notice it too? That's weird. Hey, did you see that creepy guy in the black and white robe show up at Camp Horizon? What was all that doomsday nonsense he was blabbing about? Hey, is that red dot in the sky getting bigger? Nah. Yoshi P knew that Eorzea needed a major overhaul in story, gameplay, and the layout of the world. But rather than simply doing it and having the game world pretend it had always been that way, he set in motion a chain of in-game events that would bring about the apocalyptic changes required within the game lore itself. And in the process, he and his team crafted an epic tale that reminds me strongly of some of the best parts of previous Final Fantasy games. Final Fantasy VI. Something was going to try and end the world, and we were all going to try and stop it. And in the process, everything was going to change, and we didn't know how. That was such an incredible idea, that we were literally going to play through the process that was going to be Final Fantasy XIV's rebirth. This had a benefit to the development team, too. 1.0 became a beta test for every new idea or tweak they wanted to implement in A Realm Reborn. Gameplay changes, new gear, storylines, new mechanics. They couldn't get things exactly right in the old engine, but they could test out the concepts and see how the players liked them and used them. It wasn't always easy. It seemed every month or so how we played our classes would change completely. Sometimes one class or another would end up broken. I remember Gladiator ended up in a bad way once or twice. Crafting kept changing. Just as we thought we understood it, a whole new system would roll out and everything would change. But through it all, we endured because we understood. These were the building blocks of a new game, and we felt invested in a way I've never felt before. We weren't just playing a game, we were helping to fix it. And through the constant letters and response to our feedback, Yoshi P and the development team continued to reinforce that they truly appreciated us and wanted to make this the best game they could. And so, Dalamud swelled in the heavens. The weather went insane, Garleans invaded, Primals appeared, and beast tribes encroached. All the while, we fought back and defended our cities and camps furiously. We felt like what we did here was going to make a difference. They were determining the future of the game based on what we did now. And so as we fought the enemies within the game, we also fought for the game we had grown to love. and it was lovable by the end. Though the basic underlying flaws prevented it from being all it could be, it had a flavor and a life of its own, distinct even from A Realm Reborn. The hamlets were now important hubs for hamlet defense, relic quests, and other side quests. Huge empty spaces in each of the lands had been filled with beastman strongholds, tiny fledgling little settlements, and a greater sense of purpose. Yes, much of the space was still empty and unused, and with the single zone map concept, I doubt they could have filled them much more without murdering our already overtaxed machines. But there were things to see and do now, and reasons to venture out someplace besides the camps. And then there was the encroaching darkness. They didn't tell us about all the changes, and sometimes it was hard to tell what was the developers doing and what was our own imagination. The game felt a little bit haunted. The weather changed, suddenly the type of mobs that spawned in an area would change, Guardian attacks would become more frequent. Intense Aurora Borealis would color the night sky suddenly, abruptly, and then vanish within a few days. And meteor storms became frequent. And finally, the Guardians established Castrum Nova, a fortress that, to be perfectly honest, dwarfs the ones in A Realm Reborn. Guardian airships plied the skies of Eorzea with impunity. We had an enemy now, and a purpose. We smashed the lunar transmitter, we ascended to Riven Road and put down the madman Darnus. But in the heavens, Dalmud continued to swell larger and larger. We fought a losing battle against Atmos and his minions as one by one our camps fell. It stopped being about winning and became more a question of how were we to prevent Eorzea from being obliterated entirely. It kept a lot of us playing even after the final save, when stuff really went bananas. Incredibly powerful monsters began to overrun the cities themselves, and roamed outside the gates. The players banded together practically around the clock. Who could forget the Great Gubu defensive line, and an impenetrable barrier of derp protecting Nulda? Or logging in each day to see what new relic weapon you would find in your bed. Or that one clever soul who discovered that performing a prey emote would wipe out the monsters that even a populace of relic weapon wielders couldn't scratch. It kept us on our toes, but at the same time, it was sad. We knew we were saying goodbye, and there was a part of each and every one of us who didn't really believe the game would come back. That the servers would go down and remain dead and cold, and that Final Fantasy XIV would be killed by some executive decision, leaving the MMO stage as nothing but a footnote. Some of us even cried, "No, the game is good enough now. We don't want to risk losing this forever." The day finally came, the call to the fields of Carteneau. In this final battle, all the adventurers of Eorzea in one place was just too much for the poor 1.0's engine and for the servers to handle. And there were crashes galore, and the character limit was reached so quickly you couldn't see the Guardian troops until you were already in the middle of them. But we kept at it. One last chance to throw everything we had into a fight. Then there was this weird system message, which was calling for a withdrawal. A message from the Alliance calling back adventurers. And then the game shut down, and the servers went silent, and we all turned to the internet and the final video. The scene of the end of Eorzea, and the death of Final Fantasy XIV version 1.0. I don't know about a lot of people, but I cried. Wholly unmanly tears were shed. Not because of the video, though it was powerful and stirring. It was all the scattered bits of 1.0 drawn together and woven together in such perfect harmony one couldn't believe it wasn't all planned from the big start. Answers was written for that anguish battle 2 years before that battle was ever conceived. No, I cried because of the gulf that had opened up between me and my friends. Of this community suddenly bereft of a place to gather. We were like the survivors of a disaster who had just lost their home. A few of us huddled together on Skype or in forum chat rooms, but it wasn't the same. I felt that same sense of being lost as when I left Final Fantasy XI. Where should I go now? I thought. I wandered. I couldn't bring myself to return to Final Fantasy XI. I left with such finality that that story felt closed now. I lost my connection to it. I tried out the Old Republic, Minecraft. I even made a free World of Warcraft character, though that old beast of a game didn't hold my interest long. I didn't just want an MMO. I wanted my red-haired cat girl. I wanted my rusty old knight. I wanted chocobos and airships and crystals. And I wanted to share them with my friends. It felt like forever, but the alpha finally came. And with it, true hope. This was actually happening. A realm reborn was being made. And even in its raw, unpolished form, a realm reborn was everything we had hoped and fought for. It quelled our fears, but at the same time, it raised so many questions that we were eager to hunt for answers to. What happened to Bahamut and Luizio? How did Eorzea survive? What happened to us? Soon we'll find those answers, and a million more questions besides. And we'll all finally get back to this world we've grown to love and think of as our own. And when we do, we can always think back to that creaky old ferry, and I can look at that rusty old Gladius in my inventory and remember where it all truly began.